Good afternoon, my friends. This is Paul, and today I would like to share my thoughts on the performance mode that has been added to Yooka-Replaylee. In the original version, Yooka-Replaylee on Switch 2 only ran at 30 frames per second, but to make up for it, it also had some really gorgeous graphics. Now, you have the opportunity to toggle between fidelity mode and performance mode. Now what this means is fidelity mode is just how the game originally launched on Switch 2. In performance mode, the graphics do take somewhat of a hit, but to make up for it, the game runs at double the frame rate. So instead of running at 30 frames per second, which is how slow the Thousand Year Door remake was, now it runs at 60 frames per second, which to put that into perspective, that means it's as responsive as Super Smash Bros. Ultimate. Now, I am not the type of person that is overly observant of frame rates. I'm pretty sure there's a few reviews out there where the game ran at 30, and I said they ran at 60 because it was a smooth 30 frames per second. But while I was testing this while getting footage, I switched back and forth between fidelity and performance every couple of seconds. And going back to fidelity mode made it feel like I was dragging my control stick through mud. It did feel like Yooka and Laylee were quite a bit slower. Not drastically slower, but slower enough to the point where it felt like I would have to do large rotations of the control stick to get them to run around in a circle, whereas in performance mode, it felt like every little movement of the stick added up. To put it into perspective, the hardest challenges in the game for me were always the ones that involved the green coins, because for some reason I could never get the camera to turn at the speed that I wanted, and I never was able to get Yooka and Laylee to turn to such a precise angle that they were able to follow along with the trail of coins. In the original version that I played, I had to wait until I got an upgrade from Trouser to suck in the coins with the tail twirl. In this, I was able to beat all of them in the first level on either the first or second try. So I think what was going on there was that now that it runs at 60 frames, the character movement is a lot more precise. So those tiny tilts of the control stick were read more accurately, allowing me to do twice as good, because it's literally twice the frame rate. Now, as far as the graphical differences, I wasn't paying too much attention to that, because honestly, the game still looks utterly phenomenal in performance mode. But a few things that I did notice that were pretty standout were the leaves on the trees didn't blow around in the breeze, especially not in the opening area. And sometimes when you did zoom in shots, like when you got a pagey, the area would be a lot more pixelated than it was in the original. Things like grass don't look quite as fluid as it used to be. But again, this is such a beautiful game that I doubt many of you will even notice the difference unless you're out there looking for it. Like, how many of you were actively thinking to yourselves when you played the original Yooka-Replaylee, wow, the leaves blow in the breeze? Unless if you're like me, where you're just super observant of your surroundings, that was probably one of the last things on your mind. You were probably thinking about other stuff, like the shadows and the textures on Yuka's skin, stuff like that. It was really easy to get Yooka and Laylee to do whatever I wanted. And in the previous game where I would maybe have to mash the button a lot to get them to do an action in succession, now it would feel like if I mashed a button a lot, the action would carry on longer than I wanted to because I was so used to saying, hurry up and do more tail twirls, and now it would do about as many tail twirls as I pressed the Y button. I went ahead and I replayed the entirety of Yooka-Replaylee in performance mode just so that I could get a real feel of it. So that's why this isn't a re-review, is because my opinions are more or less the same. Just it was easier to collect the green coins, the camera was significantly snappier, the game never slowed down. It did crash at one point, but it wasn't a major deal breaker because it was just me exiting a level. So when I rebooted my game, I was right next to the exit anyway, so it just took a couple of seconds for Yooka and Laylee to finish the entering the level animation, and then I just exited. I did feel like the loading times were a bit longer. Either that or I just wasn't paying attention in my original review. It did seem like, okay, this is almost into Hogwarts Legacy on Switch 1 territory. Overall, I'm really mind blown by PlayTonic's commitment to make the game twice as good while also giving players the option of keeping the original version. Like, how many major companies that are like not indies or first parties would go to that trouble without some kind of asterisk? Like, take most Nintendo games, for example. Look at Pokemon Scarlet and Violet. Rather than optimizing the Switch 1 version, Nintendo locked 60 frames per second behind playing it on a Switch 2 after you downloaded the free update. You look at something like Paper Mario: The Thousand Year Door. That only runs at 30 frames even if you're playing it on the Switch 2. And there are games out there where if you play them on Switch 2, you automatically get 60 frames per second. At this point, Thousand Year Door Remake has been out for 2 years, and Nintendo has not patched it to run better on Switch 2, whereas Yooka-Replaylee came out around, I'd like to say, July or August of 2025, so less than a year has passed. And not only was PlayTonic willing to add this in for free, they even did marketing for it, where they made jokes about the number 60 and the word frames. So all you have to do if you already have the game is just make sure it's updated to the correct version, and then there you go. And if you were convinced to buy this game as a result of the performance mode, then if you're downloading it digitally, then you'll just get this as a bonus. But if you're a physical collector, you are going to need to download it, which costs 5 gigabytes, which honestly isn't that much with the fact that I rent most of my games, but it is something to consider if you're a stickler for space. So if you were put off by the original Yooka-Replaylee only running at 30 frames, and you don't care about the graphics being super high fidelity as long as it runs well, I can say that there were no slowdowns, the green coin challenges were a lot easier, and it was overall just more fun to breeze through the levels. Maybe that's why I could actually beat some of the challenges that I did before. Either that or I wanted to speedrun it, because I only played through 3 of the 5 worlds this time around. But either way, I do think that it may not quite be 120 frames per second, but it's good enough for the type of platforming that this game demands. So with that, thank you very much for watching, my friends. I hope that I was able to explain this properly, as most of my knowledge of frame rate comes from Switch 2 Welcome Tour. So if there's anything you'd like to clarify about why this is a big deal, let me know down in the comments. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!